Jessica Donegan, and I was really excited for Dune's new 2020 movie release. So excited that I decided to read the book for the first time this year. And unfortunately, I kinda hated it. Before you get any pitchforks out or start angry typing in the comments about what a masterpiece Dune is, let me go ahead right off the bat and just acknowledge that Dune is an excellent book. It's very well written, the characters are fully developed, the world building is incredible, there's a lot to love about this book. And I want to take some time and go ahead and break down what was impressive about Dune, along with what was so unpleasant for me that I gave the book a 1-star review in spite of all of that, all the elements that were great. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and break Dune down into several categories. It will include genre, structure, character, world building, philosophy and themes, plot, and lastly, why I'm still excited for Dune the movie, even though I didn't like the book. Right? Before we go any further, just go ahead, pop into the comments, tell me if you liked Dune, tell me if you didn't like Dune, and tell me what specifically you did or didn't like about it. Go ahead and let me know now so we can compare and see if our opinions line up, or if you're giving me something new and another thing for me to consider when talking about Dune going forward. Right? So category number 1, genre. Dune is classified as science fiction, and it is set in the future with technology to navigate space and to settle on other planets. Its most prominent powers rely on psychics that are a result of a careful breeding and a highly addictive drug. This particular drug is called the spice, and it's very important throughout the entirety of the book. Dune has all the elements of a darker sci-fi, so that genre technically fits. But Dune is also a world ravaged by warring factions and power struggles, presented more like a high fantasy novel set in feudal times than a futuristic society. Personally, it was frustrating to read a book that takes all the evils of the future, space colonization that very much reflects how England originally colonized the world and tried to eradicate native people, and the evils of fantasy. This includes for me the white savior that we'll see throughout the story, the might makes right mentality that we see in a lot of tales that involve knights, warring factions, a male-dominated power structure, which a lot of high fantasy now doesn't even use, but it is a reoccurring trope to mimic the times high fantasy is often set in. And I don't understand why it exists. I understand it even less in a story that's supposed to be set in the future. You would think that we would find men and women less different and gender less defining as time went on. But for some reason, here we are in the future where we can travel through space and we still hate women and only see them as breeders and people to marry off. And there's also a gay character who is the only gay character is evil and a pedophile at the same time. There's a lot of argument about whether or not that's homophobic. Dune is written in 1964, so there are some attitudes of the time being reflected that aren't something that we would write today. Part of me wants to give the book credit for that and acknowledge it and move on, and part of me thinks this is still one of the most popular science fiction books in the genre. There's so much about the book that still holds up today and is still relevant. We have to discuss the parts that don't and that are repellent as well. In this case, how people portray gays, the casual use of pedophilia, and the constant oppression of women, and significant xenophobia, which I think was meant as a lens to hold up how wrong xenophobia is in our society. I think it was intentional, but there are some elements about it that for me are just hammered too heavily, or that show an unintentional bias of the reader, or that I just found so deeply unpleasant to read. it made Dune impossible for me to enjoy. To me, Dune has more tropes that I would recognize as a dystopian novel. Dystopian is a subgenre of science fiction and fantasy where an imagined state or society in which that has an imagined state or society in which there is great suffering or injustice. And if Dune had just been classified as a dystopian novel, I would have been more mentally prepared for what I was reading. I probably would have been more accepting of a lot of what I found in Dune. And I might have enjoyed the overall novel better. I would have known what I was getting into, but because it's classified as a science fiction novel, it just didn't work for me personally. It wasn't what I was looking for in science fiction, and it's not what I'm looking for in fantasy. It has elements of what I would look for in a dystopian novel, but even there's so much I don't like or found deeply unpleasant to read, I might not have finished it even then. So part 2 is going to be about structure. Dune is a 770-page novel. It's very well thought out. It has consistent structure throughout the entire novel. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end. There's an obvious start point in the chapters, and the ending of the chapter makes sense. As far as that goes, it's pretty well written structurally. A lot of authors struggle to write strong beginnings, or they waffle in the middle, or they have Stephen King disease where they have terrible endings. Dune doesn't suffer from any of these elements, and I've got to give the book credit to start there. Each chapter in Dune starts with an epigraph. In this case, the epigraph is an excerpt from an in-world history book. The epigraphs tell the reader, one, that the events that we're reading are in the future from us, but in the past from the present time Dune is set in, because they wrote history about what we're reading. The other thing that this tells us is the events in the book are important, world-changing even, because history books were written about the events we're currently reading. And then the third thing that these epigraphs allow is for Herbert to slip in extra exposition that we might otherwise have missed out on. A lot of regular viewers probably already know I don't like exposition, and I don't like when authors just dump a bunch of exposition. I want it to be hidden. Some people have to hide their vegetables when they're eating. For me, when I'm reading, you should hide the exposition. Don't set up a prologue that just tells me a bunch of facts about the world. Don't just have a character, as you know, explain everything I need to know that I didn't know as the reader. And don't just give me some history books I have to read. If I had read this book, I would have totally skipped the epigraphs. They wouldn't have even happened. But I was having a lot of trouble reading the book, so I went over to an audiobook, which means that I listened to every single epigraph. And I honestly don't know why they're part of the book. They didn't add anything to me. They, a lot of times, would break tension or flow of the book for me, instead of letting me go from one chapter where something is building and happening and going right into the next part, or jumping to a different part of the world that's exploring something sort of related but not quite. There's a hard break, or I have history, and there's nothing tense about history. The other thing I'll say is I don't like reading history books. Like, I like studying history back in school. I don't like reading about real world history. Why would I want to read about a fictional world's history, even in little paragraph chunks? So to me, even though that created a clear structure, I think getting rid of it would have been better. And if there had been something necessary, find another way to tell me. But in my experience, I don't even know why there were epigraphs in this book. Someone somewhere must like that kind of thing. And maybe they're even the majority and I'm the minority, but I really didn't like it. And as a result, I would just say that part of the structure didn't work for me. Another element of the structure in Dune is there's a ton of internal monologuing. And sometimes this works really well. I would say there is an area between Lady Jessica and the Doctor where the Doctor is going to betray the Atreidies family. And Lady Jessica has like a special truth-knowing ability because she's a Bene Gesserit. And the Doctor knows this, and he's trying to keep her from suspecting him and his upcoming betrayal. So he's acting in a specific way, and we're getting his thoughts about why he's acting that way, how he intends to throw her off the trail, where he wants to lead her down instead. And at the same time, Lady Jessica is talking to him, and we're getting her thoughts about her response back and forth with the Doctor as well. And in the end, she doesn't from this conversation end up suspecting him as a traitor. And the Doctor thinks he totally got away with it and all his tricks worked, and she doesn't suspect anything. And meanwhile, Jessica thinks about how she knows the Doctor's holding something back, but she doesn't think it's important, or she thinks it might be related to his dead wife, and she doesn't want to embarrass him either by making it so obvious that that she can read him, or by forcing him to expose something that's deeply personal and hurtful to him. And that creates kind of like a fun tension, because each character, Dr. Huey got away with what he wanted, right? But not for the reasons he thinks. And Lady Jessica is on to him, but not in the way she needs to. And as a reader, like, I enjoyed that. Like, oh, she's so close, but she's not quite there. And, oh, he managed to just get away with it. But he won't be able to in the future because he doesn't know why he was successful. So moments like that, where we got the internal monologue, were really great, and I enjoyed them a lot. But there are more moments to me where the internal monologue really drags. And another conversation I can think of is between Lady Jessica and the Atreidies Mentak. In this case, Lady Jessica is confronting him about how he believes she's a traitor. She's the one who's betraying the Lord Atreides. The internal monologue doesn't add anything. It's a very frustrating conversation to start with because the two of them are going back and forth in their stances. Lady Jessica wants to convince him they need to work together, that she knows he's not the traitor, and if he really thought about it, he would know she's not the traitor either. And that either these whispers are just there to create division when there's no need, or that the two of them need to work together to find the traitor. And the Mentak is already really set on the fact that she is the traitor and there's no one else it can be, and that he is, you know, computed everything. He's always right, and in this case he's right about her being the traitor. The verbal conversation expresses all of this more than well enough without having to repeat it all in their thoughts. And it doesn't illuminate why they think the way they think. Like, I never understood why the Mentak thought that Lady Jessica was the traitor. I know he intercepted a message that said that she was the traitor, but in this world where there's so much suspicion, there's so much cloak and dagger happening, that's not enough. He picked this lady out. He's known her for years. And he still, out of everybody there, chose her as the traitor, which, because there wasn't a good reason for that, to me came off as sexist, and I didn't like him from then on. And continue not to like and understand him for the rest of this novel, for other reasons as well. But I don't know, it was just a very frustrating chapter, in part because of the internal monologue dragging things out. It didn't make them more relatable, it didn't reveal other information, it didn't add to tension, it slowed pacing down and made everything feel really clunky. And there's a lot of times where the internal monologues do this. It makes things feel clunky. It interrupts natural flow conversation and pacing. It doesn't provide further insight. And it often is repetitive. Like, some of these characters just think the same thing over and over again. Like, I don't care. I got enough the first time, or the second time, or even the third time. you gave me this internal monologue. But at this point in time, I'm just tired. Like, I get it. Maybe this is to show that the characters are unchanging and unyielding, even though a lot of things are happening over this time. So I found these internal monologues to be very experimental. Where it worked, it was really well and created a delicious moment in the story for me, something that was a bright spot in what was pretty barren for me reading-wise. But most of the time it didn't work for me. It was just too drawn out, too repetitive. It didn't complete the functions that I wanted it to complete in my experience, and I just would have been better off without it, or with an editor going through and helping build these internal monologues out and making them, probably making less of them, having less internal monologue throughout the entire story, but making better use of them where we put them in. Like, if you wanted me to better understand a character or to relate to a character because now I have their internal workings, then I need something more than what I got. Because a lot of times the internal workings made me understand the actions even less. Things that I would have come up with my own reasoning for, or I would have justified for that character, I couldn't, because they gave me what that character's justifications were, and it wasn't something I could relate to. I would love if other people would talk to me about these internal monologues. Did you like them in the book? Did you not like them? Did it make the characters more relatable to you, or less relatable? Was there something I was missing about it? I feel like I was missing something with these internal monologues. And I listened to this book once all the way through on audiobook, and in preparation for this video, I listened to the first third of the book again, a second time. And while it made me think more fondly of some elements of the book, and helped temper parts of what I originally felt, it did not help with this internal monologue. I liked it even less the second time around. So yeah, let me know if you felt the same way, or if you, I don't know, just give me your thoughts on this internal monologue, because I really struggled with it. And I would love to understand it better. Usually I love to hear the internal workings of a character, the driving forces, and I'm almost embarrassed that I didn't like it here, and that I would cut it out. But that is where I'm at with it. Okay, so now we're on to section 2, which is all about characters. Dune has fully fleshed out characters. There is a huge cast of both major and minor characters in Dune, and almost all of them have full personality traits, full character arcs. They feel like they could exist. So I have to give Dune immediate credit there. It's very hard, first of all, to create a large cast, and even harder to make each character distinct and stand out. When I was going through Dune the second time, because the cast was so large, and because I knew the story already, I was actively trying to consolidate the characters and have less of them, just to see if each character was necessary, if we needed a different person for each one of the things that happened. And I counted probably about 15 characters, and out of those 15 characters, I decided if I absolutely had to cut the cast down, I could bring it down to 12 characters. How I got from 15 to 12 is by cutting out some parts of the story. So if you're going to tell the story exactly how it is on paper, you need all of the characters that are in the book. I do think it's really commendable, though, that there was such a large cast and that they all felt like the characters could exist and they all felt necessary to the story. So in that way, Dune really succeeds. The other thing I want to say is that I love big ensemble casts, so actually it should be really exciting for there to be so many characters. And in a lot of ways, even though I didn't enjoy the characters, it is really exciting that Dune did this so successfully. I think Dune's success with large ensemble casts that show a lot of internal monologuing, where you get a lot of perspective from that character. In Dune's case, they used a third person's perspective, and they gave a lot of internal thoughts from those characters. But the success for a large cast, the success of showing so many different kinds of thinking going on, allowed there to be more of that in both science fiction, fantasy, and even other kinds of genres going forward. And that's great because I love all those elements. So I do sort of have to thank Dune for the existence of those. I have to acknowledge that the success in these areas, or the perceived success in these areas, allowed a lot of things that I love to come into being. One thing I didn't like about the big cast, though, is that each character in this cast has 2 to 5 names, and then has 2, 3, sometimes 4 separate titles. So something to be careful about if you do have a big cast is just one name, or at least for me, and maybe I'm simple this way. I had a hard time keeping track of everyone, and the reason I had a hard time keeping track of everyone, even though they were distinct personality types, even though each one of them was needed in the story, you know, despite all these things, is because different characters called them different things. I already have 15 characters to keep track of. Now I have to keep track of 15 characters where each one of them has a name, a title, another name they go by, sometimes another 2 or 3 names they go by, and then another title. That's like 6 different names / titles I have to keep track of for 15 characters. Another thing about Dune's characters is all of them are really unlikable. And again, I'm a champion of unlikable characters. Usually, I really enjoy taking a personality type or a person who has traits that are highly undesirable and doing a full study of them or exploring them deeper. I'm the kind of person where if I'm reading an unlikable character, I want to enjoy what is unlikable about them, really revel in it, or I want to find like a bright side, or I want to hear something in their internal monologue and thoughts that justifies it, or that helps explain why they act that way, and then I want to empathize with them. I want to live with them for a little while and be on their side, even though they're not great. They're not a good person. You know, I love Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, and I especially love the Vampire Lestat that features Lestat, all first person. He obviously is a vampire. He's not a good dude. He's pretty awful in a lot of ways, and I just loved hanging out with him. I loved exploring his thoughts and his feelings and his emotions. And I'm bringing this up here to demonstrate that, like, I can totally get on board to read a book that's from a killer's perspective, or from a bad, selfish, self-indulgent person's perspective, or I can be on board with a racist or homophobic or sexist character. And they can have redeeming qualities. They can be a full character that does good things sometimes, even though overall they're bad people and have negative connotations for the world. And I am looking for that. I am actively looking, you know, both to acknowledge a character's faults, but to celebrate what is good about them, or what makes them human. And I just didn't get those moments from Dune. You know, there would be brief flashes, but overall it was like, I hate this person. I don't want to hang out with them. I don't want to read about them. I don't want to go on a journey with them. I don't relate to them. I don't like them. What is bad about them is so egregious, and what's redeeming about them is not enough. I just don't want to. A risky run when you tell a story with an unlikable character or an anti-hero or any character with a significant flaw is that your reader's not going to go along with you. Whatever the flaw is, whatever's unlikable about them is going to be too much, and they're not going to want to come along with you. And in my case, just all of the characters were so despicable. I just wanted the whole world and everyone in Dune to burn. Like, if we could have voted the entire universe off of the island, it would have been the best thing we could have done for Dune. There wasn't redemption there. There were certainly innocent people in Dune. And Dune did a good job creating a size and scale. And part of that's the world building, and we'll talk about that later. And part of that is in the characters, like having a large cast like this that spans different kingdoms, for lack of a better word, helps create a large size. It helps make things feel really expansive and makes you think, even if you don't like these characters, there's someone out there you would like, or there's someone out there who you'd want a better world for. It just so happens that we're following all these characters who I didn't want a better world for. I didn't want them to succeed. I didn't want them to be happy. I didn't think the way they were going about things was good. I didn't want redemption for them. The people who I often wanted redemption for, or I could see as innocent, or not even innocent, but who I would have been rooting for. The characters, the type of person and characters I would have been rooting for, I didn't think our cast was helping or doing any favors. And one more element I'll touch on with these characters is not only were almost all the characters really sexist, but they were also very xenophobic. As I said before, I don't know if the sexism was also intentional to like highlight sexism in the real world. That was hard for me to field out. I am trying to be charitable to Dune, not only saying that it was written in a certain time, but also saying that the way the book was written, I think the point was to make the xenophobia deeply unpleasant and pronounced. And part of the reason I think that more about the xenophobia than I do about the sexism is because the Fremen, who are the desert people and the othered group, are pretty awesome. They're the best and most enjoyable part of the book. They have this really detailed culture. They seem like really great people. They seem to have a pretty good hierarchy and social structure. They seem to be very strong, and they seem to have great ethics and morals. So like when you read about them, how they live, how they treat each other, how they treat outsiders, they're very relatable. And they're more relatable than the dukes and the barons and how they're living and how they're running their planets. They're more relatable than the Bene Gesserit or the guilds. All those people have things that are deeply despicable and gross about them, all of those groups. And it makes you hate them, or at least it made me hate them. But I never hated the Fremen. I always kind of liked them. And, you know, like any society, there were elements of their society that I thought they needed to work on or improve. But overall, I thought they were great, and I didn't understand why they were existing and being so good in such a hard environment. And all these other people who had more opportunity, more potential to improve themselves or improve the world around them, were just stuck in this miasma of gross. And because the Fremen are portrayed that way, even though other characters view them in ways that are distasteful and xenophobic, I felt like the contrast between how good they were and how other people saw them was supposed to help illustrate that xenophobia is bad. And I didn't see that with how women were treated in the book. So that's why I think maybe part of the point of the xenophobia within this book, and the xenophobia all the characters who aren't Fremen portray, is intentional to draw attention to a part of your own thinking that is hurting others for no reason, and is actually hurting others who might be better than you, or who might have things that they could teach you or show you or help you with if you were more open-minded. It's hard to be with characters who are like this. It's very hard. And it's even more hard to see their internal hypocrisy, because a lot of the characters hate the Fremen and hate their way of life and say really awful things about them, and awful things about how they live that are necessary because of the planet they live on, while they're depending on the Fremen to save them, or they're depending on the Fremen to provide solutions to their problems. So that, it just rubbed me the wrong way, and consistently rubbed me the wrong way, and made me more disgusted with our characters as time went on. But starting with House Atreides, we have Paul Atreides. He is the lead in this story, and he starts at 15 years old. I didn't get a lot of characterization from him early in the book when we were establishing the world and his routine and his place in it. He has this scarring moment in the first chapter where the leader of the Bene Gesserit, or Lady Jessica's teacher from the Bene Gesserit, comes and gives him a test. But it deeply impacts and scars Paul, and is something he comes back to often. And I think, too, it sets Paul on this journey of him being very troubled about what his place in the world is, who he wants to be and how he wants to affect the world that he lives in. All of that sounds really great and humanizing, and maybe that's me putting a spin that I would have enjoyed on Paul, but in reality in the book he's really whiny and repetitive, and he goes from these blank slate moments to being all-knowing and all-powerful all the time. And I find a lot of his powers that he gains to be too much. It's like a deus ex machina. Every time we need Paul to do something, he magically can. He just magically is capable. And yeah, they do set up that he has a lot of different trainers, and he has this lineage, and some other justification. It still comes off as like, oh, that was super easy and barely an inconvenience for him to do. So nothing he does ever feels earned, personally. I never was rooting for him. I never felt like he had a trial that he had to overcome. He was always just ready for them, right off the bat, and I don't know why. He has a lot of serious anger issues, and I don't like that about him. Right after his father dies and his mom and him are dropped off in the desert and trying to escape the Baron, he goes into his head and is just obsessed with the fact that he's not crying over his dad's death. You know, people respond to grief in a lot of different ways. His obsession to me is the problem. Just why over and over again do we have to hear about I can't mourn, I can't cry, I'll never mourn, I'll never cry. Like, it didn't add to the moment, and a lot of times I was like, why aren't you just, you know, going with what's happening right now? Because it's pretty clear to me that Paul's in some kind of shock, and that he is in survival mode, and part of what he's doing is he's trying to continue to play the game out, because he knows that his life and his mother's life is still in danger, and he's trying to get them out of that situation. Like, he doesn't have time to grieve right now. He doesn't have time for that mourning period. He's discovering a lot about himself in that moment. He's discovering a lot about his place in the world and what he needs to do to survive. So this constant, you know, on one side he's verbally speaking and blurting out all this information. And on the other side he's like just obsessed with the mourning or the lack thereof. I don't know, the back and forth there didn't make sense to me, because if you're in shock, or if you've recognized that you can't mourn something traumatic that's just happened to you because it's not over yet, you're still escaping, I don't think you would be obsessed with how much you want to. Maybe you would. Maybe I don't understand and that's a problem. But for me, it was not relatable that he would be saying all these plans, saying all these next steps, saying all the implications of these things, and trying to figure out what their next move was, and at the same time mentally be consumed with the fact that he's not crying. Especially because, like, 2 chapters later he does cry, so it's fine. He's going to talk it out and then he's going to mourn. I don't even understand why we had all that internal monologue. You know, I don't know what I was supposed to learn about Paul. What I did learn about him was that he's really self-obsessed. And also I learned that he's really mean to his mom. In fact, he goes from like a loving and caring son in this scene to just being terrible to his mother, who up until this point has loved and protected him, and continues in a lot of ways to love and protect him going forward. That was hard for me, that he was so terrible to his mother and continues to be, to me, just a terrible son. I don't understand why he's mad at her. I don't understand why he blames her for the fact that they are both related to the Baron Harkonnen. She didn't know that. She had no idea who her parents were. Why is he mad about that? You're born how you were born. He is really angry at her all the time for no reason. She's trying to look out for him, she's trying to help him, and he's just angry. And especially since, at this point in the story, Paul is free to do whatever he wants. He does not have to listen to her advice. He doesn't have to do what she wants. The only pressure she can have is the nagging pressure on him right now. And that's because he's so powerful. The other thing I don't like about Paul is how he treats Chani. I would say when they're all living as Fremen, and Paul is learning the Fremen ways. He treats Chani really well. They seem to have a pretty good relationship. But at the end of the book, Paul decides to marry the Galactic Emperor or whoever's daughter. And he does this as a political alliance. And he's going to keep Chani on as a lover if she'll stay. But, like, he knows how much it hurt his mom for her never to have been married to his dad. And he knows in the end, the fact they weren't married is part of why Jessica was suspected of being a traitor. It's part of what got his dad killed in the end. And he's going to do the same thing to the woman he loves? No, bro. Just forget that. That's probably the thing I hate the most about Paul. I could probably overlook a lot of things about him. I could probably overlook how convenient his power set is, how convenient his knowledge is. I could probably overlook the fact that he's literally a white savior and knows everything that anyone could ever teach him. And I could overlook his fits of anger and his poor treatment of his mother. I could find reasons to justify them, or I could find workarounds for them. But at the very end of the book, you know, it's a character I didn't like and was sort of fighting with myself to be on the same page with. And he makes the decision that led to the same decision that his dad made that led to his downfall. And I just don't understand why he did that. Especially since they just lost a child together. Like, she's already his girlfriend, lover, whatever you want to call Chani, who was, in her culture, his wife. You know, she's mourning, she's in a weak situation. She needs his love and support more than probably any other time in the story. And he agrees to marry a royal person who, station-wise, is so far above Chani. It must be really threatening and scary for her. And I just think that complete disregard, the fact that he showed so much caring and concern for her, that he related to her, he cared for her, he had tender moments with her, almost anything that was redeeming about Paul happened through Chani. And Chani helped him when he was at his lowest. Stood by him, took care of him, guided him, and leaded him when he was at his lowest. And now, when she is at one of her lowest points, he continues to cut her down even further. Just, poor Chani. She could do so much better. And for me, that was like the nail in the coffin. I was only lukewarm on Paul, and this moment tipped me to a point where I can never like Paul. And I can only wish him a swift demise, to be honest. I know Dune is a whole series, and maybe his actions make sense in a larger context, or they reframe it in a different way. But from this book, I'm just hoping that Paul dies, and that Chani gets to take over, because she's the only one right now who's doing anything halfway reasonable. So, Paul's dad is Duke Leto Atreidies, and that guy, I don't like him. To be fair, he is a really loving father, and he is a pretty good leader. His men are really loyal to him. He treats them really well. He obviously is great with strategies and tactics. He has a lot of diplomatic meetings, and he handles delicate situations well. So there's a lot that you could like about him, and if you told me that you admired this character as a whole, I'd understand it. But one thing I don't like about Duke Leto is how he treats his wife and how he treats women in general. He has this one quote in chapter 6 where he's talking to Paul about Paul's concerns going to their new home. And he tells Paul, "Don't let a woman's fears cloud your mind. No woman wants her loved ones in dangers. The hand behind the warning was your mother's. Take that as a sign of her love for us." And I just didn't like how condescending it was, that women they whisper gossip and fear, and they do that out of love. So, like, some of the most destructive things women do are done out of love, and that you should just never take their opinion or their concerns seriously, because they're just fearful creatures by nature. And if this was like a one-off for the Duke, I'd probably just let it go as the time the book was written in. but he says a lot of crap like this all the time. And even his refusal to marry Jessica comes off as really uncaring and sexist. He does it for political reasons, which might be part of him being a good political strategist. He knows that other nobles will continue to consider him for marriage as long as he remains unmarried, and he could always create a new alliance that way if he had to. But at the same time, he also knows that Jessica feels uncertain in his life and uncertain about her place in his life because he's never formalized it with marriage. He's always left her as a concubine. He knows that it hurts her continually. And he claims to love this woman, and he continues to hurt her with this. And he even teases her about it when he knows how she feels and how insecure it makes her. So I just thought that was like a dick move. I wasn't into him. I was ready for him to die. I was especially ready for him to die because he lets all his other men doubt her, even though he never doubted her for a minute. And he never considers the fact that he didn't marry her to be one of the reasons that they doubt her. You know, that he contributed to this problem that's happening right now. And then the thing he has to say to her in death is to assure her he didn't really doubt her and to say he regrets marrying her. Well, that's like too little too late, my friend. I also had a lot of trouble with how the Duke talks about and characterizes the Fremen. He often talks about them as if they're savages, like they're backwards people, as if they are not their way of living is not as good as his way. Even as he acknowledges that he needs them and that he's planning to use them as like a war force. He wants them to be his super soldiers. That kind of hypocrisy, like I need them but I also disdain them, was very repellent to me. If the Baron wasn't so obviously a bad dude, I probably would have been on his side since he didn't like the Duke. So the last major player in House Atreides is Lady Jessica. She's the Duke's consort, and I didn't mind her. She was one of the least offensive major characters in this book. She had moments that I didn't understand, like after the Duke is murdered, her and Paul are escaping in the desert, and Paul comes to a bunch of realizations all at once, and a bunch of different special skills and talents that Jessica was hoping he would have and that she helped train him for started falling into place rapidly. And instead of being happy about that or proud of him, she became afraid of Paul. And for the rest of the book, Jessica has some level of afraid of her own son. And that's really strange just because in the beginning she's such a loving and protective mother. This change of attitude doesn't make a lot of sense, especially since she knew what kind of power she was hoping he would have. And this is it, or at least I was led to believe this is what she wanted. The other thing that's difficult with Jessica as a character is how much she hates Chani. She eventually comes to like Chani as a human being and accepts her in her son's life, but she spends a lot of time talking about how Paul can do better and trying to separate Paul from Chani. It just seems very hypocritical given that Lady Jessica had no known lineage and became the consort of the Duke, instead of accepting and embracing Chani as a kindred spirit. She spends a lot of time thinking that she's not good enough for Paul and his future station. It's very hypocritical given her own circumstances. My main issues with Jessica have more to do with her as in general theory than in her personality. So Jessica is part of the Bene Gesserit. And I have a problem with the Bene Gesserit because they're all women. They're supposed to be powerful, and I was really excited for like this empowering big female role, but I just found it really stereotypical and offensive. They use the power of the voice, so basically they nag people into doing things, and they can mysteriously figure out the truth. The other thing is they're rulers and they're very powerful, except if they ever use their powers, they wouldn't be in positions to use their power again, so they just can't use any of this known knowledge or power. The other thing about the Bene Gesserit that's not so great is that they are kind of snake oil salesmen. They've intentionally gone to different planets and different places and implanted general mythos that they can take advantage of later. So they're intentionally keeping people in the dark or setting them up for their own ends, and that's pretty despicable too. And they make use of this in this novel. It's not an in-theory situation. They have this whole thing set up on the planet, and Lady Jessica uses it to create a good space for her and Paul. This is kind of disgusting. And the other thing the Bene Gesserit do is they do this weird breeding program that's basically a form of eugenics. So that's gross. They intentionally keep the Bene Gesserit's origins secret a lot of times, so that if they want to, they can create relationships for pure bloodlines that include incest without people knowing. They are trying to deliberately plan people's lineage, power, and ability out through breeding, which, number one, we know doesn't work because what a person is part nurture, part nature. But also, it's deeply unethical and troubling. It plays very largely into this story, and I think it plays into the sequels too, if I understand correctly. So that whole underlying theme is it's gross. I don't like it. And it makes the story hard to tolerate, at least from my perspective. The other character I just want to touch on, I could go on forever, but I want to try and close this up, is the Baron Harkonnen. He's the main villain, and he is fat, gay, and a pedophile. It's interesting because he's the only character described as being fat, he's the only character described as being gay, and he's the only character described as being a pedophile. And he's also the only character that's described as being like a purely evil, sadistic brute. So it's just a lot of things that they clump together into one character. So I don't love the fat shaming going on. I don't like that he's the only gay character. And I don't like the implications that if you're gay, you're also a pedophile. Like, why did we have to take all these things and make like a sinister villain? Using tropes that we know are harmful to a lot of people. Yeah, I mean, he's smart and he's devious as well, and I guess I'm glad that the villain is intelligent and makes long game plans. But it doesn't make up for some of the damage that his characterization does for many communities, really. And that really sums up the basics for the characters that I want to discuss. There's a couple others I would have liked to shoehorn in, but this video is getting really long, and I want to try to cut it off. First, I want to thank you guys for sticking with me for part 1 of this Dune deep dive review. I wanted to put this all in one video, but it became very apparent that 770 pages is too much to put in a single review. So we went ahead, we tackled the genre, the structure, and the characters this time. And next time, we're going to go ahead and start off with world building, themes, plot, and why I'm still excited for the movie that's coming out in 2021 now. So thank you guys for sticking with me. Thank you for listening. Please leave a comment about any of the things I spoke about here, any questions you might have that I left out, and let me know what you think. Again, if you enjoyed this video, leave me a thumbs up. And if you want more content like this, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks, and I'll see you guys in the next video.